Speaking of the SEC, going from a new version of an SEC game to kind of an old SEC game that we're used to seeing, we head to Baton Rouge, where we find the number 9 Ole Miss Rebels, a 3.5-point favorite against number 12 LSU, 6:30 p.m. on ABC. And man, I want to go to Peter Burns on this one. Not typically the biggest fan of Peter Burns. He's got some good stuff, but his Twitter game really does turn it up sometimes. He says this: I legit have 0.0% idea what happens with LSU and Ole Miss this weekend. There truly is not an outcome in which I would be surprised. Blowout, close game, national scandal, aliens, everything is on the table. Prepare accordingly. I saw that tweet maybe 2 hours ago, and I just thought, yep, that's probably about right.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I look at this one, obviously Ole Miss coming into this one on a little bit of a cold streak. Losing a couple weekends ago to Kentucky, not exactly bouncing back against South Carolina. They beat them pretty good, but not a very good South Carolina team, and definitely didn't look as good as I expected them to look in their win versus South Carolina. Dart completes 51% of his passes. They averaged 3.4 yards per carry in this one. Not exactly what you want to see from this Ole Miss offense that's supposed to be pretty highly touted. They're coming in to play an LSU defense that doesn't seem like it can get a stop anywhere. And so maybe a weakness on weakness type of situation. What do you think it's going to take for Ole Miss to get back on track against LSU on the road?
Well, it could just be as simple as playing LSU secondary, right? We're talking about a team that's they're 102nd in pass efficiency defense this year, which seems like a problem when Jackson Dart's your quarterback, and seemingly your wide receiver position group is the strength of your offense. So I really hope it's kind of like the game we had last year when nobody got a stop and they just kept going back and forth up and down the field over and over and over again until the clock finally hit 0. But I don't know if it's necessarily going to be that, because I mean, obviously we don't have the Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas aspect of this from LSU anymore, but I don't know what to make of this LSU team, right? So the loss to start the year against USC, which doesn't exactly look the best considering what's happened to the Trojans since then. And then you struggle against an FCS team, and then you find yourself down by a bunch early against that same South Carolina team that Ole Miss just struggled with again. But this was, to be fair, a pre-ankle injury, Lenora Sellers.
Sure.
And then you struggle with LSU, too, for a half of football. And LSU's probably only going to win one game. Or UCLA, sorry, is only going to win. Yeah, they're only going to win a game this year. I don't know if UCLA is going to win another game this year. So you get a little bit of a get-right game against South Alabama 2 weeks ago before the bye. I think it kind of comes down to, from the run game, from the LSU perspective, Caden Durham coming in, he's been a little hot and cold the last couple of weeks. He had a couple of good games sandwiched between kind of a stinker against UCLA. So can they get a little bit from him and try to control the clock a little bit, keep Jackson Dart off the field? But I feel like we've seen like 2 different versions of each of these teams so far this year. So I have no earthly clue on which one of them is going to show up. If both good versions show up, I think we could be in for a hell of a game. But, if you get bad LSU showing up and good Ole Miss, it's going to go bad that direction. You get good LSU showing up, the Ole Miss that showed up against Kentucky, it's going to be a blowout in the other direction. I'm with the Pete Burns tweet on this one. I have no earthly clue on what's going to happen or what to expect from this game.
Right. And I think when you look at this, there's a lot of defensive flaws for LSU, but one thing that's stayed the same, kind of surprisingly to me, is they've scored points. Like at the end of the game, they end up scoring a bunch of points, and definitely up and down. Not a great game, obviously, to start against USC, but I'm really coming on. You mentioned Caden Durham, pride of Duncanville High School. I know Mitch would want me to shout that one out. He got to call games for them a little bit, so that's a fun one that we like, rooting for him for sure. But, man, Garrett Nussmeier has been really solid for LSU. I've been really impressed with him, throwing the ball a whole bunch, but he's averaging 330 yards per game on almost 70% completions and leads the SEC with 15 touchdowns right now. That's impressive considering he just came off of a bye, and he still leads the league in touchdowns and all that. I'm curious to kind of see, for me, he's probably the guy that I think has the biggest impact on this game. If Nussmeier shows up and keeps slinging this thing around the yard, I think it's going to be tough for Ole Miss to keep up in a shootout. But I'm curious to see who you think, maybe it's Nussmeier, maybe it's somebody else. Who do you think, if you had to pick one player, is going to have the biggest impact on the result of this game?
I think I'm going to go. I mean, same vein, right? Kind of the LSU offense. I'm going to go Kyron Lacey. He
Sure.
real big impact in that first half against USC, and then kind of they stopped going to him in the second half. And oh, look at that, USC got back into the game. Then, can they get him the ball early? Can they kind of get some separation, get a couple chunk plays early out of him? But I like the Nussmeier call too. Ole Miss pass defense been pretty decent so far this year, but that might be more of an effect of their schedule's been atrocious
Right.
up until they got into SEC play. So that might be a little bit more of an effect of that. But obviously a good test for them this weekend to kind of see if that's for real or if it's just hey, you're kind of a paper tiger, no pun intended.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the defense as well. They come in with the third ranked scoring defense. But again, just like the previous two teams we talked about, Texas and Ohio State, hadn't really played a whole lot in terms of a good offense. And so I think you're right. We're kind of waiting to see what can we get out of this defense when they finally play a team with a little bit of a pulse, or if you're, South Carolina, a team where your quarterback's ankle is fine. And so I think we're kind of waiting to see what happens there. For me in this one, talking to Peter Burns and his tweets, he doesn't know what's happening. I'm not real sure about this one. If I'm putting this one in my prize pool, I'm putting this one in the lowest possible confidence that I have. No lockups on this one at all. But I just don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to compete in a shootout. I think this will probably turn into a bit of a shootout. I think you're going to see teams going up and down the field in this one. I think you're probably going to end up seeing some unforced errors be the downfall for Ole Miss, and could see a little bit of pass rush get home for LSU, and other things get crazy down there on Baton Rouge. So I think LSU probably pulls this one out in the swamp. I'm curious to kind of see which way you're going on this one.
I don't know who wins, but I will take LSU in the points. Give me the home field. Give me, Nussmeier's been just I don't want to say necessarily better than Jackson Dart so far this year. He certainly had a good start to the year, but I think I'm going to trust Garrett a little bit more in this one.
Definitely. It truly wouldn't surprise me either way. I do think one thing I'm willing to say is the last play of this game is almost certainly going to be either a Hail Mary or a field goal. Like you're going to see one or the other where it's just some big attempt. I don't see a victory formation in this one. Could be wrong. Maybe one of these teams really pulls away. Maybe get a late pick or something like that. But man, I think this is probably going to go down to the absolute wire and bated breath in Baton Rouge. But I think that the Bayou Bengals get it done. I think they'll get it done this week. Whichever team loses, though, almost certainly out of the playoff talk. Or at the very least, their playoff talk is on life support, and they got to do some real good stuff on the way out of the season.
Gracious him! How about